We're live.
We are live. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, audience. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Mrs. Vrinda Shukla with us today. We also have Vivek Atre, and my name is Atul Khosla. The idea today is to introduce upcoming and exciting IAS and IPS officers so that we can get influenced by them, inspired by them, and think about a career in the government, think about an exciting career in the IAS and IPS, and hopefully change the landscape of India. That's the objective that the Vivek Career Academy and Shulini University took and came together to start a series of masterclasses. Vivek is an ex-IAS officer, a motivational speaker, a TEDx speaker, but more importantly for me, a very dear friend and a visiting professor at Shulini University. So I'm going to hand it over to Vivek to introduce Vrinda formally, and we'll then get into a discussion. Hopefully, this discussion will inspire all of you. Before I get into that, Vivek, I'd like to mention one such interaction with Arun Shauri changed my life. And I strongly believe that inspiration can change people. Hopefully, through Vrinda, we can change a few lives today. Vivek, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Atul Khosla. Atul and I have been doing this series for UPSC aspirants through the tie-up between Shulini University and Vivek IAS Career Academy. It's a pleasure to have you on this program, Vrinda Shukla. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vivekji. Thank you.
And, Vrinda is family, of course, but is also a very bright officer, and she has studied abroad in the London School of Economics, was, I guess, slated at one point to be spending her life and career in Washington, D.C. or somewhere like that. Decided to write the UPSC exam and qualified for the IPS, is formerly of the Nagaland cadre and served as superintendent of police there, and she'll, I hope, talk about her early days there. And then switched over to UP cadre after she got married to another IPS officer, and is now based in Noida, posted in Noida as DCP Crime Against Women. Vrinda, you are the fourth person on this series. We have had earlier another lady IPS officer, Mrs. Charubali. We've had a senior IAS officer, Mr. KPS Sidhu. We've had an Indian Foreign Services officer, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. So we're looking forward to today someone who's much younger than the earlier speakers, who's I think now you are 6 years perhaps into the service from the 2014 batch. And what I would like to request you to do initially is to talk about the inspiration which got you into the service and your very early days to start off.
Well, thank you for your extremely generous introduction, and I'm so happy to be on this platform. There have been some very senior officers here, so I'm a little bit intimidated by that. So to speak of inspiration, there were a couple of people in my family who were in the civil services, and some in our closest friend circle, which also includes Vivek Atreji. And I had the chance in life to see them work very closely. And all of them, fortunately, happened to be so motivated and so sincere towards their work. They took it so seriously, and they always felt that the civil services were a platform that gave you a chance to make great impact. So I think just imbibing that in my early years, I always somewhere had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to write the exam. And when I was almost about to graduate, my parents discussed with me what I wanted to do. And when I told them that, I've always had it in mind to write the exam, they said, well, then why beat about the bush? The sooner you get into it, the better it is. So I came and I wrote the exam, and God was very kind that I could get selected. And so I think the one thing that I'd like to put out there is that truly the services, I think, are an exceptional career in that with very little qualification and at a very young age, they give you a very large canvas and immense decision-making power from the word go to make a positive impact for the people that you're working for.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear a little bit about your life, Vrinda, how you grew up. How did you end up at the London School of Economics, and when did you decide to, take the UPSC exam?
Right. So I grew up on a college campus in North India in a small town called Ambala. My father was the principal of that college, and he was already principal when I was born. So I was raised on that campus, and it was a beautiful campus. And my father was sort of nurturing it like a biodiversity reserve. So we were really exposed to the ideas of environmental preservation and lots of reading and access to the college library, etc. So I grew up in a very academic environment. It was reading and kind of planting things was pretty much the only thing we ever did. So I grew up with that, and then I just happened to sort of come upon an opportunity to attend an international school near Pune, and it's called the United World College. It's a part of 17 sister schools across the world. I went there. I attended that for 2 years, and once you attend a United World College, in some sense, your access to universities of the United States and Western Europe increases manifold because the schools are pretty well known in those countries. So after that, I applied for an undergrad education to the United States. I got accepted at Brandeis University, which is in Boston. And I started there and found out that they have a tie up with LSE where you could do a joint program. So you would have a joint degree from both schools. So I ended up spending half the time at Brandeis and half at LSE. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I just always had it in mind that I do want to make a life back in India, despite all this excellent education, and I wanted to write the exam. So once I graduated, I came back and took the exam.
Wow, Vivek.
Super, super. Vrinda, now tell us about your early career in the IPS. How was your first day? What was your first posting like? How was the training? And what was the transformation that you had to undergo, maybe in the training at Hyderabad, from being a London School of Economics, a US educated girl, and the hardy life of an IPS officer?
Right. So I think the IPS training actually I think is transformative for anybody. And I'll say this, at the risk of possibly causing some offense to Vivek ji, I think compared to the training of any other service, the IPS training is the most transformative because it
No, I'm with
challenges
you because
you.
I love the IPS more than the IAS for
Yeah.
reasons, other
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah. So I think, because even for the IPS, you're actually getting selected from an exam which is purely academic. But then the training is designed in a way that it challenges you so much physically that I think most people who come into it are actually quite unprepared for what's expected of you at the training. And then also, I think I've been raised in a very free thinking, free questioning environment, and my education was also a liberal arts education. So I was somebody who just question everything, question every kind of injustice that was so to speak meted out to us, like if you were made to stand in the sun too long without reason, things like that. So I think the training brought a great deal of restraint in me. It brought a great deal of discipline, and I think it taught me that as a government servant, you can't always speak your mind. You should speak your mind, of course, when it's called for, but I think it really does require a great deal of discipline of conduct on your part because you're representing an entire service, you're representing an institution. So I think in that sense, the training was a great maturing experience. And if
So,
I
Vrinda,
come to, so, yeah,
go
please,
ahead.
please. No, that's fine.
So I was just thinking, you went through a rather unconventional education from the UPSC context. You went to a more elitist school in Pune, the United World Colleges. You went to a US university, then the London School of Economics, and it's sort of very unconventional. Normally, people think you have to go to Delhi University or some of the Indian universities to really crack, or an IIT to crack the UPSC. So I think some of the participants over here would like to hear your journey. How did you prepare? What subjects did you take? And how did you really crack the UPSC?
Right. So I will admit here that I think coming from a different background did pose a bit of a challenge for me. And I also do very honestly admit to everybody that I think I never quite figured out exactly what was required by way of writing style. Especially when it came to writing style, I constantly felt like I was struggling to deliver what was required by the UPSC and the kind of like academic writing tradition that I had in some sense been nurtured in over 4 years of undergrad. And this is where I think that academies like Vivekji's Academy can play a very meaningful role in sort of giving direction to your preparation and to your style. Because at the end of the day, any exam really, it's an art. So I think more than how much you're able to cram or how much you're able to analyze, I think you also just really need to figure out the art of exam taking. So that's just something that I'd like to put out there, that I did have my own challenges, and writing style was the biggest impediment in some sense. I chose economics as my optional subject simply because it's something that I had studied for 4 years, and the syllabus for the UPSC is pretty compact. I didn't take any coaching for it. I used to meet a professor of the Punjab University for some guidance on which books are used in Indian colleges, because they match exactly with the syllabus. Because some of the concepts I wasn't being able to find in the books that I was familiar with, so I did go to him pretty frequently. I used to have him look over my answers, etc. So I picked economics. But besides that, also what I would like to tell everybody here is that I think in UPSC originality pays. So to some extent, I think we should allow ourselves to be original. Like, I'm in the service pretty much because of economics. It's the two papers in which I scored the most marks, and I took 3 attempts, and I also had great consistency in my economics performance. And I think the way I responded to the papers was very original, simply because I hadn't taken much coaching. I had read original texts on my own, made my own notes. So I think that was received well. So I do always recommend that. I think there's great merit in taking some degree of guidance, simply because the syllabus is just so large that you could really just very easily get in a tizzy trying to manage it all. So in some sense, academies really give you a focused direction in which to work. But beyond that, whatever notes are being given or whatever material is being given, I think it should be internalized in a way that it doesn't kill your own originality of response when you respond to the answers.
So I have to confess, Vivek, there was a time I was very keen to take the UPSC exam when I was at IIT. And I read a few books. I still remember there was a book on India by Romila Thapar, which was, people said you should read, and Glimpses of World History by Jawaharlal Nehru I wrote, and then his book on India. So I think just the journey is so fascinating, just reading all those exciting books, if you enjoy them, of course. So I don't know how you felt. I mean, what was the experience of going through those preparatory years? Would you encourage students, just for the sake of going through the journey, take the UPSC?
Absolutely. It's such an empowering exam. It's empowering and it's enriching. I think it's the one exam for which you read such a breadth of material. You're exposed to so much about your own country, such qualitatively rich material, whether it's the history, geography, economic history, science, the progress of science in your country. Just you're exposed to so much that I can't think of another exam for which you'd end up reading so much different kind of material, and you'd be left so enriched by the end of it. And then it's also extremely empowering because I think it takes a lot to get through this material. And just the way the exam is set up, I think it really tests your nerves. So I think just to go through the experience is so empowering. Whether you make it or not, it leaves you a much stronger and a much more enriched person than you were when you started out.
Vivek, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it a little controversial to both of you, because I'm going to pitch IS versus IPS here.
Okay.
So I'll first give you the opportunity, Vivek, to say IS versus IPS, and then we'll have Vrinda talk about it. Right?
Okay. So what I'm going to do, Atul, is first I'll ask her a quick question, if you permit, and then I'll come to that.
Okay, do that.
Vrinda, tell us about your first few days in the IPS and where you landed up in Nagaland and what happened there.
Okay. So I think I've had a pretty unusual journey because I was allotted a card. The good thing was that I had a very open mind. And my parents were extremely encouraging. If I ever expressed any anxiety about it, they would reprimand me and say that you used to make all these tall claims about how you want to do something for the country and you want to serve the people. So then you had better go and serve in places where it's most required. Don't you ever crib about it to us. So I think that really helped. It put me in really good stead, sort of leading up to when I was about to arrive there. And I reached there, and I think initially, for a few days, you do experience a bit of hostility because there is, to some extent, a very deeply ingrained anti-India sentiment, and people from the public would come. So initially, we are given the charge of a thana. The way our training is designed is they say, you must learn from the grassroots. So we are supposed to run a police station for 3 months as the police station in charge to understand how grassroots policing works. So when I was holding charge, people from the community would just come and say that, oh, this is not your country, and the insurgents will do this to you and that to you, and you had better go back as soon as possible. So those were my early experiences. But I just took to that place like a fish to water. I learned the language very quickly, and I just grew to have so much admiration for those people. And I think I was so warmly embraced by the community that I've pretty much become half Naga. And people there had just vehemently started insisting that I should, marry a Naga boy and just settle there for good. So I, in fact, had a hard time leaving it. I'm still deeply connected to Nagaland, and I run many platforms through which I'm able to keep working with Nagaland. So it's just been the most fascinating journey. I strongly believe now that I have a past life connection with the place. It's brilliant.
Wonderful. Actually, to also add, I was telling Atul offline that your speech when you left Nagaland and your last posting, that speech has gone viral on YouTube and it's available everywhere. I think so. Everyone should watch that as an inspiration. But coming to Atul's question of IAS versus IPS, I think I must defend the IAS also here, even though I have so much affection for the IPS because of my dad who was in the IPS, and because in fact, many family friends have their daughters in the IPS now. So, but IAS, I must say, gives a wider perspective than the IPS. There is so much more variety, from commerce to agriculture to culture to tourism to IT to many things which cannot be done in any other service. And then the district magistrate's role is pretty much of an all-rounder. He is the chief minister of his district. So that saying of PM, CM, and DM and SDM, also I would add to that, is still true in India. And the IAS is a very diverse service in terms of people who are from the Indian Foreign Service also spend a lot of years abroad. But now the IAS and IPS also send their officers abroad so many times that to choose the IFS now is not becoming fashionable at all. So the IAS gives you from ground reality to global reality quite a perspective and an experience. So I think choosing the IAS is still the number one preferred choice. But Vrinda, you could add the challenges and the diversity that an IPS officer experiences.
Yes, so I mean, I won't disagree with what Vivek ji has said because it's true. But I will add that to some extent, the service picks you. You don't pick the service always, because the exam is highly competitive, and the service ends up picking you. So what I do want to tell our aspirants who may be listening to us is that the government is now increasingly creating a very level playing field across services. If you look at the profiles of officers working in the various central ministries in the union government, you will see that officers of all services are now holding very important positions. So in that sense, the exclusivity of the IS in terms of working on social sector agenda is no longer, the kind of monopoly it used to be. So there is no reason to be disheartened if you're in the railway service or the postal service or the IPS or customs or revenue. If you're really keen about working in a sector or keen about working in a particular organization, and you do keep doing something to sort of build your skill set in that direction, I think that there is a wealth of opportunities that have now been made available across the spectrum. Yes, there is diversity of experience in the IS, but I think the one great advantage that IPS officers experience is that because of the fact that whatever rank we may be serving at, even if it's our ministerial staff, just the ones who serve in offices all their lives, they all undergo a basic minimum training, which is designed as per, you can say, like policing systems. So that lends a great degree of discipline to the organization. So you will often find, and I when I compare myself with my counterparts who are serving in the administration in the district, I find that it's much easier to get things done in the police simply because of this inbuilt discipline and respect for hierarchy. Whereas in the administration, you really sort of have to deal with a lot of chaos, even in your own organization, to get things done. But that said, I think those are just challenges which make the jobs exciting, and which you want to find ways of overcoming.
You're absolutely
You
right.
remind
In
me
fact,
of,
Atul, go
sorry,
ahead.
Vivek,
No,
each
no, no, go
other.
ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was
I
saying
was
that,
saying,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, Vivek, please go ahead.
I was saying that she's absolutely right in many ways. The police discipline and the kind of system the police has is it works like a well-oiled machine. And sometimes in the civil services offices and administrative offices, we don't have that kind of efficiency. And also, I must tell you that I was SDM of Firozpur Jhirka, which is in Mewat. And we did not at that time in the 90s have STD even from our residence. And there was a place near the Rajasthan border, near Alwar district, where I had to go to make a call home 40 kilometers. And I remember there was some technical problem with my landline and nobody could sort it out. I was SDM. I had to take the help of the police to get it done. So ultimately, when everything else fails, one has to go back to the police. Atul, I just wanted to add that. Go ahead.
No, I was, as Vrinda was talking about IPS, I was reminded of a few, television serials about young IPS ladies who became successful. So I wanted to ask Vrinda about one or two special instances, some anecdotes which you remember your very first few days, Vrinda, or even later on. Anything that's really exciting that can be worthy of being in a television serial.
Oh.
Some war story.
Oh, what? So I think the most dramatic experience that I could narrate is again from my first few days when I was holding the charge of a police station, and I was still pretty new to Nagaland and how things work there. So what was happening was that normally officers who are deployed at a police station, or the officer in charge, often has to do patrolling in the evening, in his area, just to make sure that after dark everything is in order. So the national highway used to pass through my jurisdiction, and I would often go with my team myself to see what they were doing. And after dark, because there's a lot of there can be potential movement of narcotics or illegal arms, etc., in a place like Nagaland. So we would start checking vehicles, and we started checking these vehicles, and I would insist on seeing the papers of the vehicles, and we realized that many of them had fake numbers, and they didn't have any paperwork. So we started seizing all those vehicles, and we started bringing them back to the police station. So suddenly, after like 5-6 days of checking, the whole police station filled up with Boleros and Scorpios and other good cars, because those are the cars that are typically used in the hills in Nagaland. That one day, it was a Saturday, and I was actually planning on going shopping that day. So I thought, I'll just quickly go and do all my signing work and then push off. So I went in, I didn't even go in the uniform, and I was literally just planning on pushing off. And suddenly these like 3-4 big vehicles full of people come. And everybody jumps off, and dramatically, they open my door and they all enter. And they say that they are from the NSCN IM, which is one of the key insurgent groups in Nagaland, and which keeps creating trouble off and on. So they quickly sort of narrated their designations, that I'm self-styled minister and I'm self-styled commander, because they have their parallel designations as if they have their own government. So I was really taken aback. It was just my first few days, and I wasn't expecting to have this kind of run-in with them. And they say that all these vehicles that you have been seizing, they are all ours. So you have to release them. And I was really taken aback. And so I was like 25 years old and completely unprepared for this. So I said, yes, you know what, I'm going to come and discuss this with you in a second, but there's somebody waiting for me in the other room. I'm just going to quickly go dispose them off, and then we'll discuss this. So I went into the other room, and I called my boss, who was my trainer, SP, in the training, and I called him and I said, sir, this is what has happened, and all these NSC and IM people are here, and I feel like one of them could just pull out a weapon and like shoot me, and I'd die for such an unworthy cause. And he laughed and he says, you know what, Vrinda, in this system, they're a necessary nuisance that you have to deal with. So it's much better to learn sooner rather than later. He said, but I can tell you something about our society, and that is that they will never harm a woman. He says, you're a lady officer, and they would just be universally condemned across Nagaland if they were to do anything to you, if they were even to lay a little finger on you. So don't you worry. You just kind of gather your wits about you, be patient, and send them home. And so I was a little bit, I regained my courage and I went back, and I started chatting with them. And I gave them 3 cups of tea. They were there for about 2 hours, by the end of which, some of them were just like, oh, my kids also want to go study in the US, so I'm going to send them to you. And so eventually what became of the vehicles was, I was just like, listen, you know what? You know that I won't be able to do anything to them right away, but I'm not going to release them just yet because they have been seized. I said, once I'm gone, you can do as you please with them, but you didn't have your paperwork in order. There's no way they can be released. But I was just polite. I distracted them with other things, and I got them caught in a conversation that they enjoyed, and that's it. They went back home and never bothered me again for the rest of the 3 months.
Wow.
Very well done. Excellent. Atul, we have lots of questions. I think we better start taking those.
Yeah. Why don't you start, Vivek? And lots of questions from the audience.
Dr. Vivek Rana, who's a senior faculty at Vivek IAS Career Academy, says Nagaland is famous for rich traditional heritage, ferocious warriors, and colorful festivals. He says, which cultural or social practice of Nagaland can be adopted in North Indian states, if any?
Okay. So they have a beautiful custom. A lot of Nagaland is rural, but I think that can also be said for a lot of the North Indian states, which are primarily agrarian, and they are organized in terms of a rural economy. So the beautiful concept that they have in Nagaland is that when the sowing of the crop starts during the sowing season, and when the harvesting of the crops is due, for everyone in the village who, let's say, is aged and doesn't have any children, or if, let's say, there are any widows in the village, or if there's anybody who has some kind of handicap in the village, the robust young men and women of the village take it upon themselves to work in the fields of this group as well, in addition to their own. And similarly, when the crop is harvested, everybody makes sure that something is added to the pile of all those who are in the category of slightly weaker in the community, just so that nobody is left too far behind and everybody has enough to sustain them for the year until the next crop. So I think that is just something marvelous I saw in Nagaland, which is why you'd never find anybody there who is going hungry, or anybody there who's debilitatingly poor, because I think there's just this beautiful hand-holding by the community. And I think that's something that's really worthy of emulation.
Bharti ma'am is asking, from a non-science background, how can a person crack the UPSC exam, because there is a mathematical aptitude test, or a CSAT, I think it's called.
Right. The CSAT, I wouldn't call it a mathematical aptitude test. I think it's an aptitude test. And what it really tests is logic and your ability to think through things. And I will say this about myself, I absolutely hate maths. I hate it. I wonder who even came up with it. I wish it was never discovered. So I'm saying this for myself, but I always used to score about 150 out of 200 in the CSAT exam. Just because, it really is an aptitude test. So first we need to remove the mental block that it's a math test. It really isn't. With a little bit of practice, you can learn how to master it. And second, it has become a qualifying exam now. Back in the day when I took the exam, it actually used to count towards your prelims score. So I don't think you have too much to worry about.
Absolutely. And one question that I have for you, Vrinda, is that I believe you went to the interview stage on another attempt and had a very interesting experience in your interview. Why don't you talk about that?
So I think you may be referring to my first interview, which I took in my first attempt. And, I was quite ill prepared for that attempt because I had returned very late from the US and my preparation was so haphazard. But somehow I managed to get to the interview. But what I encountered there was a great deal. One, I would still call it a great deal of bias in some sense. And second, I think I just was perhaps ill prepared for taking the interview, because I was like a very liberal, free thinking kind of young person, and the chairperson of the interview board was a professor of Hindi. And for some reason, from the very start, perhaps that was just his way of testing my nerves, but he managed to rattle me quite well. So I think he just kept putting me in the dock for being foreign educated and for returning and, being unfamiliar with India. And I kept trying to tell him that, no, I'm from here. But I kept getting increasingly impatient, with the way they were questioning me. And of course, now in hindsight, I realized that it was a test of my nerves, but I just couldn't see that at the time. And I did get pretty rattled because I thought, they're just being really hostile.
To put things in perspective, I must say that the greatest aspect of the civil services, the IAS, IPS, IFS, IRS, is the variety of people who come in. And if someone who has been educated abroad is sitting alongside someone who's come from the Jharkhand area and studied in the grassroots level universities and then cracked the exam, that is the best part of being in the civil services, because you have a flavor from each aspect of life. So that
Right.
I think it's very important to have people from all backgrounds.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the beauty of the All India services.
I'm going to take you back to your training academies at Mussoorie and then at Hyderabad. So you studied in the US, you studied in at the London School of Economics, and they are like LSE, especially is known for the way its teaching and learning mechanisms, etc. So how was Mussoorie compared to your foreign education, and how was Hyderabad? Was it comparable, different?
I think the two experiences are very different and they cannot be compared because those are like, through and through academic and research institutions. They are teaching you from a very different perspective. Whereas these are training academies for government services. They're prepping you to be an officer. So, a lot of the teaching that they are doing is in terms of how you have to constantly conduct yourself as an officer, how you have to manage your force, how you have to manage your positions. And of course, then the nitty gritties that you need to know conceptually, the laws that you need to know. So I think that we have an excellent set of officers who are serving as faculty at both academies, and they're very, very memorable experiences. But I think they're completely different from an academic experience. I won't call them academic experiences.
That's very interesting. But in terms of inspiration, did you find the same set of inspiration at LSE and in the training academies?
Yes, I think what you need is just passion for your cause. At LSE, it could be the passion for discovering the cause of things by way of research, which may be their motto. And here it is just, like passion for good quality delivery of public services. So I think that basic ethos needs to be the same, regardless of the otherwise difference in character.
There are questions regarding books and the methodology of preparation. So, what was your strategy while preparing, and what is let's say, since we also at the academy receive questions about smart preparation. So, how much should you do? What should you do? Which extra book should one read? A little more elaboration on the process.
Right. So I have pretty unequivocal views about the fact that smart preparation is the way to go. And I think in some sense it was a great advantage that I was not at DU, where the sense that you have to prepare for the civil services pervades from the very beginning, and these like makkas of preparation like Mukherjee Nagar or Rajendra Nagar are a stone's throw away, so you start walking their lanes pretty early on. So because I was at home, I was in Chandigarh, I was not at any of these places. I just did not get into the culture of like buying 50 magazines a month, whose names I had never heard before, and then reading all those up. I did not read a single magazine. All I stuck to was one newspaper. And then again, I think so much is said for, oh, how you must just read the Hindu. Again, I will confess that a few months into reading the Hindu, I felt like the paper just didn't work for me. I found it so tedious that I spent twice the time reading it than I typically would on a paper. So I switched to the Indian Express, which I enjoyed reading very much, and that still worked fine too. So my basic 2 cents to everybody is stick to the core books. You must make sure that you get through the entire syllabus. And I think that everybody, most academies and like most bookshops that cater to the UPSC preparation, I think they do make available a basic book list which covers your entire syllabus. And the bulk of those basic books should be our NCRT books, because they're really thorough and they really make you go through the basics. And if you look at the exam, to a large extent, you will see that they all hark back to a concept that was mentioned in an NCRT book. They just simply twisted it in a way that you had to apply the information that you had read in the book in order to be able to answer the question. So that would be my advice. That when you're starting out, at least for your first attempt, do not bog yourself down with more material than you can manage. Stick to the basic books. Make sure you read them well. You internalize the material that's contained in them. You learn, in some sense, how to apply that material, which I think comes from practicing as much as you can with past year question papers and question banks that are prepared by the academies. I think knowing the material and learning how to apply it are two very different things. You should aim to get through at least 5,000 to 6,000 practice questions when you're preparing for the prelims, and that will make sure that your material is revised. And don't get bogged down with unnecessary things and like 20 different magazines in a month. It really isn't required.
Well
It's
said.
Vivek, the same thing is spoken about cracking the JEE or the IIT exam. And a lot of people would say you need to study, 18 hours a day for 3 years. And I look at my experience. I used to play a game called actual number of hours that I actually studied in a day, and I would mark that, and the remaining would be to show to my parents, how many hours I was studying. So my average, I was just looking at this notebook which I just found. The average was actually 3 hours a day for 1 year. But consistency and focus is really what matters in cracking any exam. I think that's what Vrinda is talking about. It's the passion, it's the desire really to wanting to crack it.
Yes, and discipline. I think discipline and perseverance in addition to that. You do need perseverance.
Yeah, because you won't make it the first time, and most people sort of lose it out in the second. It's a difficult one. But talking about Indian Express, both Vivek and I are very dear to Vipin Papi, who's the ex-editor of Indian Express. Must have been the editor in your days, Vrinda.
Yes,
he now teaches at Scrutiny.
Yes.
So,
yes, a good friend.
Good friend of us. So there's one question from Vaishali here. She's saying, how has life changed after cracking the IPS? Is it different from the life before?
Yes, it's very different. It's very different. I think, suddenly, when you're a young entrant, I think suddenly you find that the world is taking you so seriously and everybody treats you so well, compared to earlier when you were a student. So I think in that sense, to some extent, and that's both good and bad, I think you carry the prestige and the burden both at all times of being an officer. You carry it around all the time, and you always have to be very watchful of what you're saying, how you're dressing, who you're meeting. So I think conduct is very important, again, simply because these services reflect such age-old institutions, and there's so much pride and prestige associated with them that I think that label never really comes off, that you're an officer. So it becomes difficult to just slip into a very easygoing, a happy-go-lucky mode too often. Of course, then the workload is also pretty significant, especially when you're on the field. It doesn't leave you with a lot of time. I think I do crave for a better work-life balance at times. But besides that, I think it's also really great in that it gives you exposure to the best things. It gives you exposure to the best platforms. It lets you meet some brilliant people on a regular basis. You're exposed to really the most, transformative things that are happening in the country. Even if you're not directly working on them, you're definitely exposed to those ideas. So I think that's sort of what characterizes life once you're in the services.
But are you sometimes pained or feel it stressful looking at all the pain that's around, Vrinda? I can only talk about myself. When I moved from McKinsey to teaching, Vivek, I felt like Siddhartha, the Buddha Siddhartha. I didn't know there was so much pain in the world. I lived a very protected life. Everything was taken care of. And suddenly, I saw lots and lots of pain around me, and it still stresses me sometimes. What about you, Vrinda? Do you get disturbed about the pain?
Same for
Especially
me. Yes.
because you're posted as deputy, as DCP crime against women. So why don't you add that?
Yes. So yes, that's 100% true. And you end up seeing such gruesome things, especially if you're in the police. You end up seeing them on such a regular basis that if you start internalizing a lot of the grief that people are going through, or the way they've been battered, or the way they've suffered, I think it can really overwhelm you. And while I think gradually one starts disengaging oneself, just because the quantum of crime is so much that to some extent you do start disengaging yourself. Every few days there will come along a case, which will keep you preoccupied, or for a few days, and you'll keep thinking about it, because just the degree of suffering or the degree of brutality that you witness is so much. But that said, I also think that in the IPS, one has the unique opportunity to have a balming effect on people when they are coming to you in their most distressed um, state of mind. So I think that I like very much. That regardless of the suffering I see in front of me, I think I always feel really glad that I'm the one who is in the position to have a balming effect on this person, just by way of just the way I receive them and the kind of policing services we give to them. So I think that sort of balances out, the pain that is caused to you.
And also the fact that you're married to an IPS officer. So tell us about that. How does it feel? And is it good to share stories from work, or you don't talk about work? How
No,
does that go?
we talk about work all the time. We talk about work all the time. We run everything past each other, especially for me, because I've only just moved to UP and he has been in the UP cadre throughout. So things are so different here. I mean, of course, every cadre has its own dynamics and the way things are done. So for me, it's just so great to have him. I have him on speed dial, and every time I run into something that I'm unfamiliar with, I run it past him. And then besides that, I think it's also just really great for relieving a lot of the frustration or the sense of inadequacy that I experience sometimes, because he gets exactly what I'm talking about. He gets it. So in that sense, I think it's great to just be able to bounce off our feelings and our ideas with each other.
I'm glad you have your husband on speed dial. I guess that's a given. So, but talking about women, let's talk a little bit about the state of women in India. And you, as a woman IPS officer, you feel more compassionate towards women. You feel like inspiring these young girls to achieve more and come into the service and other places. You feel like a role model, and what can you do to make their lives better?
Yes, so I am quite the feminist. Like I live and breathe, and I'm the lifetime brand ambassador of women in whatever capacity I can be. So yes. So on a more serious note, I feel like I'm from a family of girls where girls are taken very seriously, where they are treated very well, where they are educated very well. And I always feel so grateful to have been born in this kind of ecosystem, because I think everything I have in life and all the confidence that I enjoy is just because of this sense of being loved unconditionally, and not being considered less than anyone. And I think that's what women everywhere, women and girls everywhere, need to be extended. And I just constantly am trying to work to extend that sentiment to as many girls and women as I can. And especially, we have a lot of disparity across socioeconomic strata and across states and across so many other parameters in terms of how women and girls are treated. You'd find some extremely empowered women in India, who are at par with the most liberated, most emancipated women in the Western world also. But then you will also find such abominable discrimination and treatment of women in the same country or the same state or the same city. So I think if we as a country and as the world want to truly realize our potential, we have to make sure that women and girls are treated well, they're financially independent, and they are empowered with an education that truly gives them a choice in life.
I so agree with this, Vrinda. Every day we try very hard to, give independence to the girls who study at Shulini. I think it's so important because Vivek, and you agree with this. If a girl gets educated, she influences 100 people around her, not just herself. So we're changing her community. Uh, I'll just switch the topic a little. Dr. Vivek Rana is asking two constructive reforms that can help improving the current situation. Your opinion on those, Vrinda? If it's
Current situation of what?
He's probably talking, or the previous point is probably regarding policing at the district level. Let's talk about that. Maybe policing.
Okay.
at the district level in UP, especially, he says.
So does he want to know about two reforms which could improve policing at the grassroots level?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Okay.
right. That's right.
Okay. Right. So I think two reforms that I would say is, and this is not something that I've come up with. I think it's been recommended over and over again by many police reform commissions. But now that I'm in the service, I realize how true they ring and how much we need them. I think one is um, a certain degree of specialization in the roles of the police, because what's happening right now is, for the most part, that the same police person, is investigating a case of murder, the same one is investigating a case of theft, the same one is doing duty when like a minister is visiting, the same person is expected to investigate a very sophisticated economic crime or a very sophisticated cyber crime. The same person is supposed to do duty when it's Eid or Diwali or Holi. So I think that is just leading to a great degree of chaos and to a compromise in the quality of policing services, especially in terms of investigation of crime, the quality of the case investigation, and the timeliness with which it is done. And that's what's delaying justice in large measure. So I think it is about time that our police force starts some degree of specialization, where duties of law and order or duties of bandobast at the time of a festival or some event, and various kinds of crimes, they all develop their own verticals, and people who are posted in these verticals are trained and incentivized to grow as subject experts in these verticals. So that's one suggestion. And the second I would say is, we already have it on paper that there must be stability of tenure, that people must not, be posted every month or every 4 months simply because they took a decision which was inconvenient to the leadership at the time. So I think we really, in letter and spirit, need to implement stability of tenure down from the level of the police station in charge all the way up to the Director General of Police.
Absolutely. And I would also like to ask you about your own inspiration. I mean, I know you spoke about your dad, who's been a principal. I know that your mother is a very senior IRS officer, chief commissioner, and maybe even senior to that, I don't know. And your aunt has been Secretary Health, Government of India. And so tell us about them.
Right. So I think when it comes to the services, my mother and my aunt are my two key inspirations. They are both brilliant women, and the kind of zeal that I have seen in them towards their work, it has not waned for a day. They have the same kind of excitement and the same kind of commitment towards their work that they must have had the day they entered the service. And I think that for me has been so admirable. They are both officers with reputed integrity. And I think that that's what keeps me going, to know that it is possible to survive and to have a career that spans about 35 years and to not have to compromise your ideals. People go on and on about the kind of corruption and the red tapeism and the bureaucracy that exists in all our systems. But, I've been fortunate to have personal role models who show that it's possible to defy it. And it's possible to defy it without losing your cool and without, compromising the quality of your family time and family life, and to, just keep making a positive impact in whatever capacity you're serving.
Such a wonderful
Yeah.
Vrinda. Apologies, Vivek. For the young students listening to this, we so many times criticize and we talk about corruption. But I would really like to say over here that there's so many people who are doing great pieces of work, not just in the services, but even outside. And they should really become the role models rather than talk about people who are corrupt.
Absolutely.
And I believe, Vrinda, there are more people who are honest than corrupt, but unfortunately, the corrupt ones get the eminence and they're spoken about.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that every aspirant, must pledge that they're going to keep adding to the pool of those who are honest, so that being honest becomes the norm rather than the exception. I think that's really the contribution that the new generation of officers can make, to make sure that, the fact that the bureaucracy is characterized as just hopelessly corrupt, we have to be committed to changing that reputation. That's the most meaningful contribution they can make, really.
I think mentorship would also help. I wrote about it one day that, in civil services, what happens, a person comes into the service with great, energy and enthusiasm. 5 to 7 years down the line, Supposing you don't have a role model, you don't have anyone to look up to, and you are subjected to all kinds of influences, and then some people succumb. That's how it
Yes.
happens.
Yes.
So I really feel that if you have mentorship, somebody even institutionalized in the IAS, IPS, senior people looking after the youngsters, that your go-to person, that, like your training SP was there at that time. But now
Absolutely.
your boss is the only one you can talk to, and sometimes the boss is not the right person. So someone should be there. I mean, it's a recommendation which perhaps we can.
Absolutely. You're absolutely spot on about it. Like, I always credit my trainer SP for infusing me with such a great sense of positivity about Nagaland. He was himself a Naga. And just the way he sort of trained me to think about Nagaland. He was the one who encouraged and said, you must learn the language ASAP. You can never truly mingle until you do. And I think that set the foundation. Had it been somebody who was constantly trying to alienate me or constantly drilling in my head that, I must try to find another opportunity, or I must leave the cadre, or I must try to run after postings in, just the one or two districts that are considered good, I think that I would have had a whole different approach. So mentorship is transformative. It's transformative.
Atul?
So Vivek, there's a question on the new education policy. I don't know whether Vrinda you follow that or not, but Rohit is asking two major positive and negatives about the new education policy. Probably
Atul?
Vivek might perhaps be for it, but if you're following it, we'd love to hear your views.
So I'll be honest, I've just had a really busy last few days. I haven't had the chance to read a lot about it. But I know the one thing I think that stood out for me when I just briefly looked at the paper was that they're insisting that single track institutions will be phased out. So just an engineering college, or let's say just a humanities degree college will be phased out, and they want to create multidisciplinary institutions. I think that is a remarkable idea, because just the way we approach education, the way we approach research, the way we approach innovation, it just needs to be multidisciplinary. You have to, from the very beginning, teach students to think across disciplines in order for there to really be any credible innovation or new thinking. So I think that is a reform that's remarkable. But just I heard that they also wanted some negatives. I don't think per se I've read anything which has been criticized very much in terms of the way the policy is designed. But I think the problem in a country like India is that we have so much on paper. Like, our systems are near perfect, our policies are near perfect if you just look at them on paper. The problem is in the implementation. So I just hope that it doesn't, for years together languish as something that we just have on paper. I do hope that we can make rapid strides in implementing it. That's all.
Absolutely, Vrinda. And what I really love, Vivek, is the effort to increase the expense in education from 2% to 6%. We would love it to be 10%, but 6% is still a very, very huge step. And if that happens, there's going to be universalization of education from primary to higher ed. And that's phenomenal, actually. It's going to change the way India is. So I'm actually very, very excited. And there's a joke going around in engineering college circles, Vivek. When we grew up in engineering colleges, there were like 3 or 4 girls in a batch of 300. So all the IITians are very excited. I don't know how the NIITians are. There's much more diversity in these colleges.
But I want
But
to ask, yeah, Atul?
No, Vivek.
I want to ask Vrinda about media. Somehow I've been DPR and all, and the media's presence has become so overwhelming in society. And you must have had some run-in, some reporter wanting to know something. So, have you had any experiences that you would like
Yes,
to improve?
I'm the media in charge and the official spokesperson for the department. So it's
Okay.
just, it's a never-ending headache, to be honest. So I think that what you're pointing out is absolutely correct, Vivekji. The media is a formidable force. It's a formidable force, and I think that the effect is both good and bad. It's good in that just the kind of default transparency and scrutiny that has come about because of such an overwhelming presence of the media, and because social media has emerged as such a powerful platform where citizens are reaching out to officers and their offices directly for grievance redressal, and the fact that it has become this sort of platform where officers are expected to respond. Even ministers, union ministers directly respond to people's problems. So I think that has really led to the creation of a sort of new relationship between citizens and the government. I think it has really eased the access that India's common man has to the government. And this degree of media scrutiny, I think, in general, has infused some degree of discipline and caution in terms of the way we do things, because we are just so hyper aware all the time of media snooping on things. But that said, the media has also gotten extremely commercialized, and something I will share here, because I'm exposed to it all the time, because I'm dealing with crimes against women, is that in some sense it has become a business. Like there are people who have made it a business to report fake cases, let's say, of rape, and extort money by running a media campaign that forces the police to register the case, even if our basic inquiry tells us that prima facie the case cannot be established. The kind of momentum that they generate in terms of media pressure is so much that we are really cornered. We do that, and then that becomes a sort of method of extortion. And there are media persons who are very much a part of this, because they are the ones who help build this false rhetoric. So I think that is the one downside of the fact that the media has gotten so empowered and it holds so much leeway in terms of how it impacts our reputation.
And our training of officers also needs to include media handling in a way, because suddenly, as an officer in the district, you have a mic thrust in your face, and the guy says, "Bite, sir, bite," and this officer doesn't know what to do, and he's always on. So it's really too much over scrutiny, which needs to be handled very delicately.
Very carefully, very, very.
So Vivek, we are coming to an end, and I am very tempted to ask Vrinda about her life outside the IPS. I mean, we spoke so much about everything else. So what do you do apart from work, Vrinda? What are your hobbies, and how do you keep yourself so glowing and so charismatic?
So I do quite a few things actually. I am very fond of exercise. I run quite a bit, and that's something the IPS training gave me. I wasn't much of a runner, but they make you run a great deal, and it made me fall in love with running. So I try to run pretty regularly, even if it's at like 9:30 in the night. And I also try to read a lot. I've always enjoyed reading. Like I said, it's something we grew up with. So I do try to keep up with reading. I'm also extremely religious. I pray quite a bit, religious and spiritual. So I do make time twice a day for my prayer sessions. And I also do some voluntary teaching. Like I said, I really cannot overemphasize how much I care about education and the role it plays. So wherever I'm posted, I adopt a couple of children who don't have access to very good quality education, and I try to squeeze in a couple of teaching sessions every weekend. So those are my key
I'm
hobbies.
going to volunteer here something, Vrinda. If you're aware of brilliant 12th standard students who need quality education, higher education, we'll be happy to and excited to give
Oh,
them a
that's
scholarship.
great.
So let
That's
us know.
great. Point them in your direction. Oh, for sure. That's so great to know.
So we are coming to an end. Vivek, if you have any last question, I'm sure you do.
Last thoughts. Brinda is absolutely an all-rounder, a complete personality. I can see long way to go, and lots of learnings. But already you're obviously a role model for so many who are aspiring to be civil services officers. And today is the era of openness and social media, and so much is known about each officer already. So I think your journey will be of interest to all the aspirants. I think Vivek IAS Career Academy and Shulini will hopefully keep in touch with you, and we'll keep listening. We'll keep hearing from you about your progress, and so keep coming on and inspiring our students.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for saying that. I'd love to be associated with both institutions, and sort of just be associated in whatever capacity I can. And thank you for considering me worthy of being with you today here on this platform. And I really enjoyed this chat, and I hope that whoever was listening in on this chat, could find something of value.
Thank you, Vrinda. Thank you, Vivek. It's been an extremely inspirational discussion. I always say this all the time. We have these interactions. My mother keeps on nudging me, saying, "I told you you should have taken the UPSC," and I decided not to at that point of time. So I'm going to get another, knack on my knuckles when I go back home. But very charming indeed, Vrinda. Thank you so much. I'm sure all the students listening to you would have got extremely inspired. Hopefully, we'll see some IAS, IPS, and other UPSC officers emerging out of this discussion. Thank you, and thank you, Vivek, of course. Always extremely inspirational and charismatic. So thank you, both of you, and look forward to being in continuous touch. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.